Thank you all again for taking time out of your evening to join me. We're going to talk about gamification for e-learning. I, once again, probably have too much content crammed into too short a time frame, but let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so a lot of the content I'm going to cover in the next hour comes from Carl Kopp. He wrote this book, The Gamification of Learning and Instruction. He is a mainstay at basically any e-learning development conference where he talks about gamification. We do have this book available at the Pollock Library. I don't recommend reading it for fun. It's pretty dense. It is a really good desktop reference, though, if you want to keep it on hand to get some inspiration, to look up the research that backs up the power of gamification, things like that. So highly recommend giving that a look, but pleasure reading for the beach, it is not. Okay, so let's start by getting a little interactive. Would you please pop into the chat or unmute yourself and share, what do you think makes something a game? What are the elements, do you think, go into making something a game? Again, you're welcome to unmute or just jump into the chat.
A reward or points?
Reward or points, yeah, definitely. So we got some items in the chat here. Yep, you can win or lose. It's interactive a lot of the time. Competitive. Usually there's some sort of competitive element, usually with other people. Ooh. Sorry, I bumped computer. Score system. Consequences for behavior. I like that. Consequences are really important. They are fun. Yes, games should be fun, or at least enjoyable in some way. Sometimes you get frustrated by them, but you're motivated to continue on. There might be a quest or purpose. You do some problem solving. There's progression. Yes, there's a progression throughout the game. You don't just do the same level over and over. Each level might get harder. It might be constraints, like maybe limited time. Good. These are all really good points. Okay. So yeah, I agree. This should get progressively more difficult. There's going to be some sort of feedback in the way of, dying or having to redo a level, but that's also part of the feedback. So there's tasks you have to complete. You get feedback of some sort of consequences, and theoretically it should be constructed in a way that's going to be motivating to you to continue on. All right. So there's three main elements that make a game a game. Three at the core of a game. There's an objective, which is basically the win condition. You have to know what it is to win, what the goal is of a game. There's always going to be constraints, particularly environmental. For instance, chess is played on an 8x8 board. Soccer is played on a certain size field with the goals laid out a certain way and the other elements of the field laid out a certain way. And of course, there are rules, and the rules usually only are adhered to because we all agree that they are rules. This is one of the kind of like social niceties, right? Like red lights only mean stop because we all agree that they mean stop, and thank goodness we all agree on that. And in games, we agree the rules are rules. People that cheat are usually not looked favorably upon. And that's from John Ferrer, who wrote a book called Playful Design. He had a nice podcast episode with Connie Malaman on the e-learning coach. Okay. One of my favorite definitions of a game, I heard this quote, I don't know, forever ago. It's a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. I always think of something like, again, soccer, where your goal is to get your ball into the goal behind your opponents, right? And you could just like pick up the ball and just like put it in there, but no, you can only use your feet. You can only, I don't know, stay on this side of the field. You can't go offside to pass it to your teammates. There's all these rules that make it much more difficult than it needs to be. And that's what makes a game fun. I mean, there's all sorts of obstacles in life. Let's choose some unnecessary ones to make it a game. And there's lots of elements, of course, besides these three kind of main qualifications to make something a game. There might be limited time. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, but that gives a sense of urgency to a game. There should be rewards. I'd say humans are intrinsically primed to seek out rewards. If there's no rewards, we're probably not going to continue as much as we would otherwise. There should be some sort of feedback or consequences. Levels, it should get progressively more difficult. There should be some sort of progression throughout the game, because as you are performing the in-game tasks, you're going to get better and better at them because you're working on this, right? And if it remained the same, you're not going to continue playing that game. Often there's an element of storytelling, some sort of world building for the more complicated games. There's going to be some sort of game aesthetics, opportunities to replay or do over if you mess up on a level. There might be leaderboards. There can be a lot more besides this as well. It's just a sampling. Karl Kopp's book has a bunch in there for you to check out if you want to know even more elements of a game. Okay, so why would you want to make your e-learning into a game or use games in your e-learning? Generally, games can be a very good thing to use because they are motivating for your learners. And this really depends on your learners. If you have learners that are not into games, like for some reason, I imagine you have some advanced engineers and they need to complete some sort of like advanced training on some really esoteric subset of engineering knowledge, they're probably not going to be pleased if it's made into some sort of a game. They probably want it straightforward, just the facts, master the content, bring it back to work and move on. Whereas if you've got maybe college students, you're trying to get involved in like social life at the university, maybe you would want to use games. Maybe that'd be really appropriate. But regardless, it's really important to know who your learners are, if they're going to appreciate the fun that comes from a game, or if they're going to be completely turned off by it. Because if your learners are not into it, it will be very demotivating for them. It's going to have the opposite effect of what you're going for. Additionally, games can be really beneficial to learning because they offer distributed practice, which means that you might be performing the same task many times in a game. And the more you practice something, the better you get at it. There's something called spaced practice in the science of learning, where if you perform a same task like over time, you know, whether it's like seconds, minutes, or days or months apart, it's going to help further cement it in your mind. And you're going to be better at it versus if you only do it once or twice in a single sitting. So games can offer that. Of course, scaffolded content or increased difficulty. You have levels in the game, you have progression. This fits in really neatly with the concept that you can scaffold content, particularly if you have beginners to a topic. You might introduce them to the topic by having them do some reading. You might have some sort of practice activity for them. You might make a more difficult practice activity, offer some more content, and maybe have some build up to a final quiz that's really difficult. It's a simplistic example, but it does really help if you are able to scaffold content and then kind of slowly take away those scaffolds until the learner masters whatever it is at the end of an e-learning. And also flow. I remember there was someone that did their final project on flow, and I can't remember who it was, or maybe it was a paper in a class.
Was it Lindsay? No, not Lindsay. I'm sorry. I think it was 50. Oh, the one that got married, Kepler?
I can't remember. I don't know the name.
I forget her first name, but anyway, I'll remember.
I don't remember. Pop in if you do, because I kind of wanted to email her or reread her paper because it was good. So flow, if you're not familiar with flow, that's the state you get in when you're doing something that's really enjoyable and you don't notice the passage of time. So that might be you're playing a game. That might be you are reading a book. It might be you're just on a walk and you're just really into the walk and you don't notice how much time has passed. Flow is a really wonderful state where you're doing something you enjoy, time passes by, and you've been really productive with your time. And anyways, I should have reread that paper. I'd have much more to say about flow. But this is something that a lot of the time, if you're doing e-learning or games for a workplace, it's a positive state to help your target audience get into to complete an e-learning. Like if your learners are completing your e-learning and they don't notice a passage of time, you're doing something really, really well. And that's going to be a much more effective learning experience than if, you know, you're doing some sort of like recorded webinar, maybe even this webinar where you're watching your clock going, oh, is this done yet? So flow is a very good thing when it comes to learning. It's a state I think we all often seek to achieve if we don't know what the name is. Okay, so back to Karl Kopp. He likes to use the phrase serious games. So we have games that are just for fun, like again, soccer, baseball, I would say chess. Chess is a fairly serious game, but COP uses the phrase serious game to really refer to games for learning and maybe for games to effect some kind of social change. There's actually a website called Games for Change. I'll pull up really quick here. And the link here is in my PowerPoint. I'll share that at the end. This is just a collection of games that are educational in some sort of deep way or encourage role playing that helps you understand what it's like to be someone else, maybe someone disadvantaged or someone struggling and you want to understand their struggle better. Understand deeper social issues, understand history better, things that you're going to hopefully, you know, enter some sort of flow and get really deep into. It's a nice place to choose games for education as well. You probably are familiar. Oh, thank you, Marie. I see your comment in here. This is Kelsey. I'll have to look that up. You are probably all familiar with serious games from some point in your education. They've been around since, I mean, 70s or before. They don't have to be computer games to be a serious game. But of course, my favorite example from my own childhood is the Oregon Trail. We'd go to the computer lab as a class, and we would get through the math assignment or the reading assignment really fast so we could all see how we would meet our unfortunate end on the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail, of course, exists today. This is the DOS version that we played on in our often monochrome computers. I also spent a lot of hours and entered many flow states playing Where in the World or Where in the United States is Carmen Sandiego, which again has become a very large franchise where you are a detective trying to figure out who stole something, but along the way you are unraveling clues that you have to figure out what destination they pertain to. And so you learn about geography and you learn about cultural aspects as well by trying to chase the thief across the world following their clues. And of course those are old DOS games that are near and dear to my heart. And there's newer games like this one's called Quart Quest. This is from a platform called iCivics. You can if I hover this, you can see the little iCivics.org. This is a collection of games that help you learn about civics in a way that is not dry. For instance, in Quart Quest, say that 3 times fast, you are a bus driver picking up passengers. Each passenger tells you whatever their legal trouble is in a story, right? In a way that like kind of humanizes them and seems realistic, and then you take them to the court that they need to resolve that legal trouble. So if someone has like a misdemeanor, you have to take them to the, I don't know, county court. I'm probably saying this wrong because I didn't play the game enough. If they have like a felony, they have to go to the federal court. There's different kinds of courts, and you have to figure out where each person needs to go. But to help you, you do have a sidekick in the game that's also a passenger on the bus to help you detangle these things. And it's a lot more fun than just reading about what kind of cases go to a federal court, what kind of cases go to a state court, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunity to use games to affect really deep and important learning, but still have fun doing it. And again, the more you play a game like this, the more distributed practice you get, the more that information is going to be cemented in your mind, and you're going to do very well in a test in class, for example. Okay, so let's pause for a second. Are there any other serious games that you know that are maybe near and dear to your heart, or maybe not? Maybe they're total failures for you when you were playing them. Marie just loves games. All games are serious games. The captions on this PowerPoint are hit or miss. Alex, I feel you. I like games, but I've never gotten so attached to a game that I've really finished it. I think the only game I've ever finished was one of the Silent Hill franchises. That was pretty much it. Brenton, no, serious games is a phrase coined by Karl Kopp, just to refer to games that are for learning or games that like affect some sort of like deeper social change. So like things that like they're serious games, they're still games, but they're serious in some way that's going to affect some positive change in you for the better. Lauren, I was never able to beat a game as a kid. My sister, we had a Sega, and my sister would play Lion King for hours and hours and hours, and she finally beat the game, and I got too frustrated by dying every time. Yeah, it's Breton. Word munchers, number munchers. Yeah, there's a lot of really simple games for grade school, especially, that can help with making repetitive drill type learning much more fun. Addie Jr., I think I probably played one. Yeah, Carmen Sandiego, yeah. Jumpstart CD games, yeah, we used to have the CD-ROMs. You had to put like the CD-ROM into like the thing, into like, had this like plastic case. You had to put the whole plastic case into the computer. That was like the first CD-ROM my school ever got, I think, when I was a kid. Learn typing through Timon and Pumbaa. Oh yeah, we had something called Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, which I also found very frustrating because it'd make a bad sound if you hit a key wrong. Duolingo, yes. Use Duolingo. Yeah, Marie. I'm bringing back memories for you, Marie, huh? Oh, when you answer right, yeah, a lot of racing games. If you answer right, your little character can go faster across the screen. Marie, you loved Mavis Beacon. I learned to type very well from being an English major, I think. I don't know if I could have gotten there with Mavis Beacon alone. I was too frustrated when I got things wrong. Okay, let us scoot right along. Oh, Suzanne, again, anti-racist board game. That sounds fun. Oh, zombie running app. I've been meaning to actually try that zombie app. Typing of the Dead. These are all great. I want to check out all of these games. They sound like a lot of fun. Okie dokie. So let's talk about games and e-learning and focus a little bit more on the practicalities of actually developing games yourself, because this is a more of a storyline focused webinar. I've been doing a storyline focused webinar, so let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so games and ID land, ID being instructional design land. This is a word that I coined. But basically what I've noticed in my experience in instructional design is that there's not really in the field a unified definition of games and or gamification. And most of the time when you see e-learning games, they're just like regular e-learning modules with cosmetic gaming elements. Like, you finish this section of the tutorial, here's a badge. Oh, you finished that, here's 100 points. You answered that correctly, here's a gold star, you can collect your gold stars. It's really easy to just kind of like, put lipstick on the pig, add in some cosmetic elements to a game. And of course, that's not a real game. It's not necessarily a bad thing if it's just cosmetic, and maybe you're not hurting the learning experience. Maybe it's got enough personality that it is helping increase motivation a little bit, but they're not true games. At DevLearn this year, which was recorded, which is great because I'm still working through a lot of the presentations, there was a man, Dr. Jonathan Peters, that gave 4 levels of gamification, which I thought was really rang true for me. He says that the first level is just cosmetic. So maybe you just add the aesthetics of a game, you add maybe some points or other really simple design elements to kind of liven up an e-learning. So it's, maybe more fun and funky than it would have been otherwise, but it's not a game. The next one he calls accessory. The level is accessory. So you might do points, badges, and leaderboards. I've made, games, simple games like these, where maybe it's just a multiple choice quiz, but the more answers you answer correctly, the more questions you answer correctly, the more points you get. And maybe there's a leaderboard, and maybe it helps the learners feel good about their score. Or maybe they're just like, it's just a quiz, guys. Why is there a leaderboard? So a little bit more involved than a cosmetic. There's some sort of like functional aspect, but it's still not really a game. So integrated is where he says that gamification is actually core to the learning experience. It's not just dressed up. There's not just, a functional aspect. There's actually more of a new environment where learners are really experiencing this as a game. It's not just another tedious e-learning module. The game mechanics are really integrated into the learning process. So it's not like you're just answering a multiple choice quiz. You're doing a simulation of some sort of on-the-job task you might be doing at your normal job. You're doing something else that should be aligned to the real world, but it really is more of a true game. Ooh, and the final one there, of course, is forgive my French, raison d'etre. The entire program is actually just a game. And this may or may not be a game for learning, but as any of you that have played games probably know, when you play a game, you end up learning, right? You learn how to play the game, you get better at the tasks in the game. Learning might actually just be a byproduct of the game itself. So learners know they're playing a game, and learning is almost like besides the point at this point. So again, in ID land, there's different explanations of gamification, what makes a game, what doesn't make a game, dressing things up, not dressing things up, whether or not, this is real effective or worth developing and spending your time on. It may or may not be appropriate for any given context or, again, target audience. So you want to know your learners and what they might enjoy and find useful. Okay, so of course, there are major development constraints. Any of you that are, serious gamers, not like serious games, but like you're like serious gamers, you're on Twitch watching other people play your favorite games or something. The games are really, really complex. People develop games for a living. It takes massive teams of people to develop a very complicated game and serious expertise in a specialized software to make games. So there's lots of constraints if you want to do an e-learning game. Software is probably going to be one of your top constraints. If you're just using Storyline or Captivate, you're going to have some major constraints for what you can actually do, because with software like Storyline and Captivate, you're basically just creating a fancy website. It's not really going to be like a fully immersive experience like you would get with, I want to say off-the-shelf game, or like a Steam game or something else. Additionally, games are really complex, of course, so designing them takes a lot more time. Developing takes them a lot more time. You have to do a lot more debugging. That's going to take a lot of time. Graphic design, I think, would actually be a major component that would be a huge constraint as well, because if you want the game aesthetics to look professional or, at least not distracting from the game, that takes a lot of work. And again, probably a lot of people. And I didn't even include the word budget in this list. There's lots of more constraints I'm sure that you can think of as well. If you have some more, feel free to pop them into the chat box. But there's a lot that goes into a game, and it can be very challenging to build out yourself. So if you want to take a quick look at Bloom's taxonomy, if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, this is basically cognitive learning divided into 6 easy to recall levels. The bottom level is remember. So basically with any topic that you're new to, the first thing you're going to do cognitively is recall things like basic concepts and facts, right? So imagine if you are a junior in high school taking a history class and you're starting a new unit, say on the Civil War, you're going to start out by learning, what the dates of the Civil War were, maybe who was involved in the Civil War, where the Civil War took place, really basic, large concepts that you need to remember so that you can begin to understand the stuff that comes after that. Okay. And then basically these all kind of feed up towards the top. So you start kind of down here with any given topic, and you're going to work your way up until finally you mastered everything so well about this topic that you are able to produce new or original work. Now, when it comes to Storyline or Captivate, you're only going to be able to go so far in an asynchronous e-learning. All of you are enrolled in MSIDT, you're taking a facilitated class. You can do a lot higher level learning in a facilitated class because you have a real person that you're interacting with that's creating your work, that's creating assignments, that's like tailoring the learning experience. But if you have an asynchronous learning experience that you've built out in Storyline, there's really only so much you can do because everything in that experience is automated, right? It's kind of like, a multiple choice quiz versus an essay quiz. A computer isn't able to grade an essay. A computer can grade a multiple choice quiz, but there's only so much you can measure with a multiple choice quiz. So in my experience, this is pretty much as far as you're going to go with Bloom's taxonomy if you're building out games using Storyline or Captivate. Again, if you're using more specialized software like Unreal or Unity, which they use to build like games, like big G games, you're going to be able to do a lot more. But of course, you're also going to be spending like hundreds of thousands, if not, millions of dollars developing a game. Okay. So all of that said, there's still lots of ways to create games in Storyline and to create games that aren't in Storyline. So for instance, Carl Kopp did a nice little presentation at DevLearn. He had the term frame games. I only saw him use this term in this presentation. It wasn't in his book. But basically, a frame game is just kind of what it sounds like. It's just a frame of a familiar game that you put your own content into, and you are probably very familiar with these. So the first example he gave, he called Earthquake. This is a game he plays over Zoom with his students because he's a professor. I can't remember what school he's a professor at. But he has his students team up and they choose kind of like Battleship, like 1A, 1B. If they get a question and they answer a question correctly, they get 100 points, but they should know they might accidentally hit an earthquake. All of these X's on screen here, these are all earthquakes, where basically it's like you lose a turn, right? So this game is just a frame. It's called Earthquake, but the content is all about instructional design. I'm sure at some point you have all played, yes, Marie already beat me to it in the chat, Jeopardy! Easy to build out, and well, relatively easy to build out in storyline, just kind of tedious to build. Pretty much everybody has played either Jeopardy on TV, played along Jeopardy on TV, or had an educational version of Jeopardy that they played along with, because it's just a frame. You can literally put any content you want into there. Another one I've built out is tic-tac-toe. I'll demo this in a little bit, but each box here, when you click on it, you have to answer 3 questions correctly to get this box for yourself. Otherwise, it goes meh, it gives you a O, and that's for the computer opponent. So if you're X's, you have to answer correctly to get the X's. Otherwise, if you answer one question wrong, it goes meh, and it goes to your opponent. So this is just a frame. Like tic-tac-toe is just a way to deliver content, and actually basically multiple choice distributed practice quiz that's a little bit more palatable than just, a regular old multiple choice distributed practice quiz. Okay, so back to serious games. For a game to be a serious game and to be effective as an e-learning, whatever activity or skill the learner is doing in the game needs to be the same or basically perfectly aligned to something that you would do in the real world. A lot of the time, people get enthusiastic. Oh, Lucy's got Jeopardy running in the background. That's funny. A lot of people, game designers or e-learning developers can get overly enthusiastic and say, all right, we're going to do this spy game, and they're going to do all these things, but nothing they're going to learn in that game is necessarily going to transfer to what they need to do at work. Instructional design tends to be very corporate and workforce oriented. So that's something to consider with where, your own working context is. In general, you're using a game to teach someone something. So whatever that learning objective is that you have, that learning objective stays the same. You can do some corollaries that, you're aligning the game to that learning objective. It's not actually what they're going to do exactly in real life, but it still needs to be well aligned so that they learn something that's actually important and useful for them. Here's some examples of this. These are from Carl Kopp's book again. The company Cisco, for example, had something called the binary game. If you're not familiar with binary numbers, it's ones and zeros, and it's basically the bottom foundation of all coding ever, right? Ones and zeros are what makes the world run. And new employees that were unfamiliar with binary numbers, they would play this game that just taught them to recognize and understand binary games. Think back to Bloom's taxonomy. Remember and understand were the bottom 2 levels. This was a really good example of a serious game that taught something they're going to use at their work and is going to help them understand and do their work better. But it was a game where they just had to identify ones and zeros and how they worked. IBM had this game called Innovate. It doesn't sound super exciting, but it's kind of like maybe it's fun. It's like sim business where there's a fictitious company, and the employee learner has to make decisions for this company and then experience the consequences of those decisions and see how they actually affect the business. One of my last webinars was on scenarios, and scenarios are kind of similar. So this is like a really built out scenario, right? Where you are presented with a problem, you have to make a decision for that problem, and then you experience the consequences of that. So that easily can be turned into a full-on game that would have really useful learning potential for whatever you're doing in real life. Yeah, Marie mentions learning the Dewey Decimal System for library shelving. Super tedious to learn, but if you turn it into a game of some sort, and I actually did have a student once that did a Dewey Decimal game, or tutorial at least, it can be made a lot more engaging than just, index cards and memorizing, for example. Okay, so talked a bit about constraints, talked a lot about elements. Let's talk about pitfalls. And I'm sure there's lots more pitfalls than what I present here. If you have more, please drop them into the chat box. So pitfalls could be, of course, limiting game elements to just cosmetic. You know, if there's just badges on screen or it's just a dressed up e-learning, that's not really a serious game. If it is not done well, it can just be seen as, you know, cheesy and inauthentic to your learner, and again, could be demotivating for your learner. Our goal here is to induce flow and to motivate our learners, so you don't want to do anything that might distract them from that. So we just discussed, if your tasks being performed in game are not well aligned to what they're supposed to be doing in the real world following the game, that game is not a successful learning experience. You always have to remember this is a learning experience. Whatever they're doing in the game has to be well aligned to real world tasks. Coming back to, I don't know, say something like Carmen Sandiego or Carl Kopp talks about spy games, for instance. It could be just up a game like a spy game where you're doing some sort of problem solving. That can still be really well aligned to a real world task because, say, at your job or in real life, you need to learn to practice problem solving at some given topic. And if you're doing similar problem solving, but you're dressing it up as like a spy and you have a persona and there's some other game elements in there as well, that's going to be an effective learning experience if it's done well and done right. Feedback, of course, is really important, similar to the tasks not being well aligned to real world tasks being a pitfall. If there is unrealistic or non-existent feedback in a game, it's not going to be a good learning experience. I like to talk about the importance of feedback as being really critical to the learning process. If you are, you know, trying to test out your knowledge and you have no way to figure out if you're right or wrong, you're not going to be able to reinforce that knowledge and understand that you are right or wrong, right? Talk about this a lot in e-learning. So again, you present your content, you have some sort of quiz, and say that quiz doesn't actually, maybe it just gives you a score at the end and you don't know if you answered each question correctly. Your knowledge and your skills are not going to be reinforced by that, and you're just left kind of uncertain of where you stand. So feedback is really important. So positive or negative, it's all going to be corrective and help you reinforce whatever that knowledge or skill is. Another big issue is difficulty. I'm sure again, people do this for a living for a reason. A game can be too easy or it can be too hard. I don't have any very good advice on that at the moment, but it's something to consider as you're building out your games. And a lot of the time, if you have do-overs built into your game, say, you know, you make the wrong choice, like a choose your own adventure book, and you die and you're only 10 pages into the book, that can be potentially demotivating if you have maybe a big chunk that you have to start over. Any of you that are serious gamers, you know, if your character dies in the game, you start the level over or you start the game over. And if you're like 3 hours in a game and you've had to go back to the very beginning, that's really frustrating and demotivating. So think about that if you have a do-over, how demotivating that might be. There's actually a, I didn't find it in time to demo it for this webinar, but there's a storyline game someone made that was like you're drinking your way through Europe or something. But if you answered a quiz question wrong, the game was kind of structured by trivia questions you had to answer. It kicked you all the way back to the beginning, which was super frustrating to have to go all the way back and have to answer all of those questions again. So again, consider your audience, do a lot of testing, figure out where an appropriate place to respawn would be. All right. Let's pause for a moment. Any other pitfalls? Feel free to unmute, use the chat box. Any other thoughts? Please let me know. All right, in a moment, I'm just going to move along to storyline demos. Mandy says, yeah, making sure things map, flow, navigate correctly. I would say that the design in Addy would come in really important in building out a game, especially if you're using variables or triggers. It's really helpful to have all this mapped out on paper, as it were, in advance to save yourself time in the development and make sure everything is built out correctly. Brenton, yes, Pitfall is a great game. I actually had an Atari as a kid. We played Pitfall on the Atari. It was really fun. Alex, yes, games would be really good for learning tedious info like anatomy. Yeah, you see a lot of it used for like spelling, math, stuff that you're not really excited about, but you got to learn. Maria had an Atari as well. What happened to that Atari? Yeah, Lucy, too hard is a big one. Too many steps in verification to obtain a digital or not real badge, for example. Remembers the model of her Atari. I don't remember that. Apple II. Brent had an Apple II, apparently. I didn't have an Apple. That's so funny. I didn't think about that as I was saying Pitfalls. That totally corresponds to games. All right, let's scoot right along here. Okay, so generally my webinars are storyline oriented. Let's go into storyline. So this is a list of games I developed or modified myself. I built all but 2 of these from scratch. Obviously not the more storyline games down here. Let's give you a quick look at these. Maybe these will give you some inspiration as you are considering building these out yourself. Oh, let me start at the beginning here. Okay, so speaking of tedious things, when I was a librarian, one of our jobs was
hey, once a librarian, always a librarian.
You know, I struggle with that. I say I'm a librarian, but I'm currently a non-practicing librarian. It's like being like a lawyer that isn't employed as a lawyer or something. Yeah, I'm still a librarian at heart. So when I was employed and being paid as a librarian, one of our jobs working at Cal State Fullerton was to teach APA, which is super tedious. I mean, like, raise your hand if you have APA. Alex, these are all going to be linked on through this PowerPoint. I really need to update my website. Turns out I've actually got some Flash-based storyline games that no longer work, which is a little bit embarrassing. But they'll all be in the PowerPoint for sure. Actually, if I can find let me see if I can find the chat really fast. In case any of you have to go early. Where is the chat? Oh, I know where it is. There it is. Let me put this into the chat. Oh, perfect. Okay. I still had it in my clipboard. So into the chat, in case any of you gotta run. This is the link to what will be the recording and what will be the PowerPoint. I don't think I've put it in there yet, but right after this presentation, I'm going to put everything in there because I've been modifying this PowerPoint right up until this session began. So everything, oh, Marie checked. Thank you, Marie. It's empty right now, but everything is going to go into there and you'll have links to all of these things in the PowerPoint. Oh, Suzanne, great. Yeah, you can play this APA game. I built this on 6th edition, now it's 7th edition, but I don't think there's anything in these that I'm going to show that needs to be changed, so they should be good to go. Okay, so reference list. Yeah, APA is really tedious. I've gotten really good at APA because I correct people's APA, and I was teaching APA as a librarian, and I used APA in my own degree programs, I think both of them. So at one point, I was feeling spunky, and I created a few games. And this is part of a larger scenario that I built where it's like I simulated you having to finish a reference list. Some of you that have been in my 540 class, and I assigned you all to do it. But I need to redo that also for 7th edition. It's a little bit dated now. But I had sub games within it, and these are the sub games. And the idea with these was that it was like the knowledge check or the distributed practice, where it's like a game within a game, and you can, if you're not sure how you're gonna, do building this out, or you need help before you build out your reference list, you could play this game to get a little bit better at it. So the rules are basically, as I kind of mentioned earlier, you click on a box, and to win that box, you have to complete 3 multiple choice questions. And I wanted to align this to real life by offering an APA guide along with it. I actually built out a custom APA book for this tutorial, but it's out of date, so I replaced it with the APA OWL. So you have this to refer to, because in real life, when you're creating a reference list, you're not doing it from memory. You're doing it by looking at the APA guide. So my thought was that I'm lining this well to a real world task, because in real life, you're referring to something to build out a reference list. And if you're completing a quiz on a reference list, you should also have the same opportunity to refer to something. All right, so you go through this, you answer the questions. If you get it correct, let me finish this really fast. It's all pretty simple, put things into order. So I'm testing a few different aspects of the reference list. You submit it. If you get it, you got it, you get the X. And then when you go back, the box will autofill with an X. If you don't get it, say you answered it incorrectly here, then it goes to your, computer opponent, which is the O. And if you get 3 in a row, of course, you win. As you can imagine, this is probably pretty complicated to build in the back end. If we have time, I'll show you. And I'm also going to put the raw files into that folder as well. So if you want to check out the back end of these, you're welcome to as well. Carol, that was a hard game. Lindsay taught me APA for sure. Oh gosh. Okay, so that's tic-tac-toe. So this is this is like a frame game. It could be any sort of frame game. I'm just having you complete multiple choice questions related to APA reference lists. And each box is a separate set of questions. So basically what I did was I built out 9 question banks in Storyline. And each of these boxes pulls one of those up and it shuffles the questions. And I've got it each little mini quiz set up to affect the desired change for the X or the O on this. Any questions about this? I always have too much to cover in my webinar, so I wanted to scoot right along. So again, frame game, something tedious. Your reference list is made a little bit less tedious by completing a game, perhaps. I did have this as an optional activity, so people could self-select into it if they wanted to try it out or not. Okay. This I did not build myself. I mean, I could, but building games is a lot of work. This is also an APA game where it deals with just the authors that you would list in any given reference list citation, okay? This was built by Tim Slade. If you ever watched any webinars or presentation by Tim Slade, he's wonderful. If you haven't, he's wonderful. You should go check him out. He builds beautiful things and gives really great explanations of how to build really effective e-learning, like visually. Like he does presentations on animations and how to use them. Other aspects of visual design, he's pretty clever. But again, this is basically a timed trivia game. So you have the gaming elements here. It's not a super exciting game. I wouldn't call it a fully serious game. It's more of a frame game where you just answer a multiple choice question and submit. So you can see this is actually just a gussied up quiz in Storyline. These are built out master slides for each type of quiz question, because you see you answer it and you still have to click submit. And then tells you the correct feedback if you got it, or if you didn't get it, you didn't get it. Suzanne, yes, very much it resembles Kahoot. This is more just like an individual version, but you can assign Kahoots, which I've done for my classes as well. And Kahoot, much easier to build out and assign than building something out in Storyline, but this was fun to build because it was something that, again, that included as part of a larger game. So there's just, 10 questions here. I think it's important in a game to be able to track your progress. So I've got the question 3 out of 10 listed here. On the tic-tac-toe, you can see the 9 squares, and you can see what you need to do or not do. So I think that's important too. In any e-learning, I say it's important to kind of know where you are and how to be able to manage your expectations of what's going to come. So I would also do that in games, or in your games as well. Just a little bit. Okay, this is a really weird one that I created. I spent too much time one day building out a little space shooter game with little like spaceships, and you had to like kill the spaceships as they came down. And I decided to repurpose this. Again, I was trying to align this to a real life task where you need to recognize if your volume, issue, and page are formatted correctly in your citations list. And this was always something that was kind of confusing for me until I realized that in an APA citation, the order is volume, issue, pages. And I'm like, oh, that stands for VIP. The VIP has nothing to do with the space theme, but hey, cut me a break here. But the idea is you need to shoot down the ones that are formatted incorrectly. So I've got a good example up here. So the volume needs to be italicized, and then the issue and pages should not be italicized. And you can shoot 3 incorrect ones as your lives, and then you die. So this one, incorrect. So if you pop that, there's actually a volume that's not coming through. And you have to recognize them as they come through. So again, this is supposed to be true to life in that you are recognizing formatting. So when you need to check your own reference list, this can give you some distributed practice in doing that. Let's see. Let's shoot one that's actually correct. This one's correct. I'm going to shoot it. So you can see, oh, I've already killed a couple of lives here. Here, let's go ahead and kill myself. And so the idea is that this gets progressively harder as you go through. There's more, they come faster. And this is it. This is basically like a 1-slide game. with just a ton of elements on it. And you can play again if you want to, or you can move on. Oh, you can see it's got a weird glitch where this is still moving. I don't know why. Oh, thanks, Veza. Yeah, this is a fun, silly game to build. And how I built this was actually, these are all just shapes with the text inside, and they're all formatted the same. And I had a correct one and an incorrect one, and I just did a whole bunch of copying and pasting after I gave them all animations. So basically, this is just, they're all animated. They all have a enter from top animation that I set to go for like 5 or 10 seconds or something. So if you looked at this slide in the raw version, you would see that there's just a whole bunch of crap like above the slide, and it's all just set to like come slowly down through the slide until it gets completely overwhelming. And I think there's actually a glitch where you can't beat the game, so that's kind of fun. But again, the idea is take something tedious, make it a little bit less tedious, but still keep it true to a real world task. All right, Jeopardy. Again, I did not build this. It's very pretty. This was built by someone, John Harker, who shared the template on E-Learning Heroes. It's wonderful when you can find really high quality examples of games. Even better if you can find people that share your templates with you. Because I could build this out, but it would take a long time to build out, and it takes a long time to make things pretty. So if you can reuse something, that's even better. So you know how this works. You put in your topics, you put in your questions. It tells you if you're correct or incorrect. And this one, it's not the most elegant as far as usability goes, but it gets the job done. The box appears after you've answered it. Your score appears down here. You could reset it and go to the next level, so on and so forth. So Visa asks, how would a flowchart look for a gamified storyline project? So that's a hard question to answer, because you'd have one flowchart that kind of maps out how the overall game works. I've talked about this with students one-on-one for projects we've done in class, but you'd probably end up with additional sub-flow charts. So you probably have like one big one that gives the overall big picture. But then if you had, a complicated module or an in-game task, you'd probably want to flow chart that out. And if you had the same task a few times in a game, you might just flow chart it out once, and then just create your content separately that could be plugged into that. I don't have a really quick example for that. I don't have any examples of flow charts for games, but I would say, again, probably multiple flow charts. It's where it gets really complicated designing these things. Keep the questions coming if you have more questions. Running a little bit low on time here. Okay, so this one I built out for a live library event, and this was fun. So this one isn't fully operational, but what I did was I found someone online wrote directions on how to use JavaScript and Google Spreadsheets to make a live internet-enabled leaderboard that connects to Storyline, so that when you play the game, or a simple trivia game, your name would appear live here for anyone else that was also playing the game. I've got a link to those instructions through the PowerPoint as well. And so we were actually playing this live with people and having them just go through and answer. Again, these are just like, not very exciting trivia questions that you go through. It gives you a score at the end. And then if you make it to the end, you put in your name, and then it tells you where you rank in the leaderboard. This was fun to build out on the Storyline end, and it was fun to try to get to work with Google, because there's also some coding that you have to manipulate and enter onto the Google Spreadsheets end as well. But that was really cool that no matter who was playing this game and where they were, that Google spreadsheet would keep the leaderboard information and feed it back into this leaderboard. So this leaderboard would update live depending on how people that are also playing the game did. All right, so those are my personal examples. Again, I've got I'll provide raw files and links to the published versions for those in that folder. I'll do that probably tomorrow. I'll promise tomorrow. I might get some done tonight, but I'll do it tomorrow for sure. Check tomorrow. And those are my versions. You're welcome to poke around and maybe reuse if they're helpful to you. And I've got a link here too to more storyline games to check out, and they really vary in quality. A lot of these are created for e-learning heroes challenges, so people were really pressed for time and kind of just came up with stuff really fast. But ones like this, like card games, I think are really interesting, and those could be fun to try to build out. A lot of these people also have the raw file available for you to take a look at and reuse as well. So take a look at those. It's really nice to see how people built things out. Okay. Let me move that over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. I'm pretty much on time here. I'll provide the raw versions of my files in that folder. If you have questions about how stuff works, let me know. We can discuss it further. Some of them are pretty complicated, and some of them I built like 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't really remember how I put it together, so it might take me a little bit of time to figure out what I did and get back to you. Okay, so I mentioned that Karl Kopp wasn't really an exciting book to read, and certainly not inspirational, but I do recommend Jane McGonigal's book, Reality is Broken, as an inspirational read. I read her book, and that's when I was actually inspired to start building out games and storyline. I like to say that I became an advanced user of Storyline and Captivate by playing with the software, and what better way to play with the software than by building out games? You know, think of some simple game and try to recreate it in your software. Like, don't do chess, maybe checkers, maybe a dice game or dominoes or something. But I really recommend this book. It's wonderful. She has, I don't know, it's just a fantastic read. There's a lot of storytelling in there as well that can be really inspirational for you. So highly recommend. Okay, big takeaways. So adding superficial elements does not a game make. Just slapping badges on something doesn't make it a game. That doesn't mean it's wrong to slap badges on something, but don't call it a game if it's not really a game. Gamification can be motivating, but you really have to know your target audience, because if your learners are not motivated by a game, they can be demotivated by the game. And if someone's not motivated, they are not learning. As Karl Kopp has the term serious games, games can create serious change, especially with storytelling, stepping into someone else's shoes, problem solving, something you've never had to do in real life potentially. So learning, behavior, social, all these things can have serious changes because of games. And there is that website, Games for Change, I linked in the PowerPoint. You can check out to see more of that. Storyline is great for simple games. You're not going to be able to build out really incredible first-person shooters or anything like that. You'll use the software Unreal or Unity for those, and there actually are free versions of those that you can get if you want to try that out. That's a whole other discipline. We're talking about e-learning. We can make simple e-learning games totally achievable with Storyline. Start simple, build your way up, and be mindful of your constraints, your time, your resources, what the software is capable of, visual design, all those things. And my biggest takeaway for you is just to play with your software. You know, get inspired, check out my examples, see the examples on the Storyline website, see what other people have done. Play with your software yourself. Take some time aside to do it. You'll probably find yourself entering a flow state and learning a lot. Okay, that is it from me. I am finishing on time. I am going to stop the recording.